All right, we're back with another impact of generative AI in marketing. This is our LinkedIn video series. I'm Steven Strauss, and ultimately really excited to continue to connect with so many friends within the industry who have an impact and get to talk a lot about the way they're using AI, specifically in marketing. We hear a lot about AI, we hear a lot about generative AI, we see a lot of fun things across the board in what that means, but really putting it to practical use and understanding how brand marketers specifically are building out new initiatives and leveraging that technology. And today I'm super excited to have Alan Magee, who's long been a friend of mine, join us and chat a little bit further around how he is thinking about AI specifically in his role today. So Alan, would love a quick introduction for the audience.
Thanks for having me, Steven. Alan Magee, I am the Vice President of Marketing for Empire Portfolio Group. Most of you probably have never heard of Empire. We are a wellness portfolio group of brands. So we are one of the largest owners operators of Orange Theory Fitnesses across the East Coast. We're also the largest owner operator of Relive Health Clinics, which is a medical clinic and wellness brand on the East Coast also. So I've been with Empire about 2.5 years, oversee all things marketing, comms, media. I say anything that touches a consumer or a consumer experience comes to myself and my team. And my overall background, I've been in marketing for over 20 years across a number of industries in restaurants, hospitality, tech, the med spa world, and mostly on the brand side. And then now over the past 2.5 years, really sitting on the franchisor and operator side of the business.
Love that. Awesome. Well, Alan, thanks so much for joining. I also love getting to have a conversation with somebody who has a breadth of experience across a lot of different industries, because I think the way that we think about the application of AI and generative AI is actually different by industry. And so it'll be really interesting to kind of hear your perspective and the way that you think about that based on the plethora of experience that you have. And so let's just like kick things off, right? In jumping right into things and talking about the impact of AI overall. Let's start off with the softball, right? What's your take on just the impact? We've seen a lot in generative AI and AI. We're seeing fun things with Sora and Gemini and all these different things are being thrown at us. So just what's your take on the impact of AI and generative AI in the consumer brand space in general?
I think it's interesting to think about, Stephen, because I think there's perception and there's reality from the marketing world. And I may be a naysayer on some of this, but perception is that marketers are using AI and a ton of AI capabilities. And I talked to a lot of marketers. I've talked to a lot of AI companies and partners. I've been to a lot of conferences. And what I hear is a lot of talk about wanting to use it, a lot of talk about this is how we use it. And then when it gets down to actually using, what I'm finding is marketers aren't using it as much as what's being said, or if they are, they're using it in a very basic way. And I think part of that is a culture change of how to bring AI into a business and integrate it while you're still doing business without a stop and a start. And I think like that's one of the biggest hurdles. The other part is figuring out of what, where it, depending on what size of brand you're in. If you're in a very large brand, there's a lot more regulations in certain industries, and and in others it's a lot looser. So I see more newer industries or smaller companies using it much more robustly, whereas large companies, it's very hung up inside of all the technicalities and the legalities and all of those things of it, which is kind of counterintuitive. You think the bigger brands with more money, more people, more resources would like totally leverage it and generate it. But I see the smaller ones like us and other newer startup type companies are really using it at a much larger scale.
I love hearing that. It's kind of the age-old David and Goliath type story. How like what ways are you seeing AI be a game changer for small businesses in general as they try to compete in a big fish world, if you will?
Yeah, I think when I think about it, there's like a couple easy ways, right? One is writing, and that's one thing. If you don't have a copywriter, If you don't have an agency to support with, writing takes a lot of time, and writing with AI, being able to disseminate to not disseminate to be able to like distill information down to something more simplified, to be able to say one thing in 5 different ways, to be able to help answer questions, to be able to put those things in, whether they're chat bots, whether it's copy for landing pages, for emails, for all of those things that technically would take a lot of like brain and creative power. It helps support those processes. It doesn't replace fully being able having someone to do it, but it helps speed up that process. And that's where small marketing teams really have to rely on AI to be able to crank out the volume of work that they're trying to do, because otherwise it's not an option of like, hey, instead of doing 5 emails this month, we're gonna do one. It could be like 5 emails or none. Like AI helps facilitate marketers that are time constrained to be able to actually do more with it.
Totally. You bring up time, and I often view time, right? As they always say, right? The one thing you can't get more of, and you can't get back. And in doing that, right? Like that becomes almost an ROI metric that we have. And so I'm curious to get your take. Like, is that the metric that marketers should truly focus on for measurement of the impact of however they're thinking about utilizing AI, right? Does it always have to be dollars, or are there other benefits, right?
Yeah, I think time is a key one. Like time is probably the very first one that you're going to see the benefits from. Now, yes, there's AI in things like media planning, media strategy, creative development, right? That you're able to put an ROI on or a dollar return on. But I think those are a phase 2 in most cases. Time is the easiest one that you're able to have people spend less time to be able to put their time towards other things that are a little more manual or are more impactful to the business.
Totally. And I'm sure too for you that you're already seeing this, but like, is there a specific example of time saving that you're seeing, if that's our ROI metric, that you're seeing in the way that you're, implementing some sort of AI strategy internally?
Definitely. I mean, I'll take a couple examples of, we respond to a lot of guest reviews, and we have a lot of templated type of responses, but every guest review is vastly different, and they take time. Sometimes they're complicated responses, but being able to use AI to help deliver a response in the brand tone of voice that is something that something is specifically related to the question or to the review that's given, that saves so much time. That's cut our time on that by in half. The other part is, in a lot of businesses, you're talking about your services, your offering, your product, and sometimes you can only say it so many different ways. So
Yeah.
AI does help with being able to talk about something, for a social post, for email, for a landing page. It helps you deliver that in multiple different ways to bring new creativity to life, from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, right? I mean, it almost is it's a way for us to think about this topic we've been talking about as marketers for so long, right? Personalization, the big thing of how we're trying to make us with our consumers, this one-to-one relationship, brand to consumer, and everything else. And I feel like that's what you're getting to, right? Is AI is starting to actually allow us to get closer to that personalization, almost in real life. And I guess, like, in thinking through that, and in using it in the way that you just described, right, to try to be more personalized in the conversation you're having with your own customers, what does it look like in practice for you, right? Does it differ from the traditional methods that you've been leveraging or that you've worked with in the past? And if so, how?
Yeah, it doesn't differ significantly. Honestly, I wish I could say that it did. I don't think we're there yet. It all depends on the tech stack. There's some really good tech stacks that are out there that you could layer AI onto that give you really good personalization. For our brands, we're not quite there yet. So it's one of those things that I can see where it could go and where it works, but not quite. So we're really using it as it's still in a manual nature in a lot of ways, but um, it's helping scale of manual things that we're doing up a lot faster. The
Gotcha.
other
Oh, sorry,
the
go ahead.
other, the other thing that we're using it for outside of just copy is also imagery. And so that's one of the things that does save time. And being a small business, you're historically stuck with either you're doing photo shoots, you've got to build your own content, or you're doing iStock. And this helps build that middle ground of, if you can once you can figure out how to use it to be able to customize more imagery and customize design, whether it's inside of Canva, whether it's Mind Journey, like whatever that is. Once you kind of crack the nut on it, it is something that you can utilize. You don't have to have a graphic designer, or if you're a graphic designer, it's something that you can use as a tool in your toolbox, and that does save time, and it helps get to that personalization of having more personalized assets that go along with personalized copy, right? It's like those are the two arms that I see when we talk about creative.
Totally. On the creative, I mean, I find the creative part obviously very interesting for a multitude of reasons. But within that, Alan, like, is there also a risk of over personalizing information, right? This quest that we have, right? And you talk about that. It's like, how many images do I need created, or how much content, or how do I do that? So, like, is that a real risk that we should be looking out for?
It's a risk. I mean, I think there's very few brands that are ever going to get to that line where they cross the line of that risk, to be honest. I think majority of brands are still doing marketing personalization as a segmentation. So you're part of this audience, or you've taken this action. I mean, see it much more on the retail side of showing the personalized product, right, to you that you search for, or serving you up a personalized recommendation. I think that is totally fine. I don't think that I haven't seen anybody that I feel like is going to go past that line. I think in retail you could definitely get there, depending on how many SKUs you have, how much product.
Sure.
But that's something that you would have dealt with anyways, and then you just wouldn't have been able to personalize it. So it's, in some spaces, I think it's like all the way or nothing, but I don't think that line is going to get crossed anytime soon.
Gotcha. One of the other things that comes up a lot with content specifically, as we think about, whether it's sourcing the content or actually synthesizing the content, or even some of like the entertainment value, like I mentioned earlier, like that Sora has put out, and even Gemini and some of the funny things that it's put out when it comes to our forefathers and all that kind of stuff. But is this idea of privacy, right, and ownership? And brands especially bigger brands, have long been very concerned with maintaining any sort of privacy related to their business, to the way that they conduct conversations with their customers, to the way that they make sure in working with agency partners that all of that content is owned and that they have the license rights to it and everything else. So do you feel that there's any complexity that comes along with any sort of with these privacy concerns, and how are you seeing brands at least try to assuage those concerns?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely concerns around that, especially when you look in industries like finance, medical, a lot of places that are highly regulated industries, and just any industry that has any company that has IP. Honestly, like, yeah, you can use an open source platform, but then everything is out there, and that's what you have to be careful of. And I think there is a real fear of that. And so, looking at platforms that are more walled garden platforms, and being able to upload your information, you being able to own it. It's not living in an open environment. And that's where I'm seeing more brands who are making that investment into AI are starting to do that, because it makes them feel more comfortable. It meets regulations. But again, you've got to be really careful about what you're plugging in,
Sure.
what you're plugging in there. And so, that's where we're going, is looking at more walled garden solutions. And I see from a lot of conversations, that's really what a lot of larger brands and brands that have very specific IP, that's what they want to go to, because they don't want their data floating out there. They don't want a strategy document floating out there. They don't want all of this information that easily is floating out there. I think open source is fine for a lot of things. But as a brand, you have to protect your brand and you have to protect your IP.
Totally, totally, totally. You mentioned, Alan, you talked about it earlier in saying that you use AI today for, and small businesses do, for a lot of copywriting. And you also said that there's a lot more marketers talking about using AI or generative AI than are actually using it. So I'm curious, from your perspective, like, have you seen anything that you feel is like truly groundbreaking for marketers at this point, and disrupting, kind of the marketing world as we know it, or at least has the potential to?
No, nothing, nothing yet that can jump at and get super super excited about. I think there's a lot of good individual solutions, but you're stacking individual solutions together.
Yeah.
That's what I haven't seen an all in one yet. That's either an individual platform or something that's open sourced. I'm sure they're out there. But it's almost like you're building your own AI tech stack, where you could have 4, 5, 6 different solutions that are all synced up together. I think that's, the ones that are doing it the best of that. They're stacking it together. And then you have your own tech stack and your own digital stack over here. So it's just replacing that. But I feel like at some point there's gonna be an aggregator, and it's all gonna roll into one. And just depends on who's gonna be that aggregator that's gonna put it all together.
Yeah, totally, and allow all those different pieces to play into each other. And I also hear, like, what you're talking about is and understand, if there's a lot of us talking about it, right, versus actually using it or leveraging it, then there's a lot of folks that are trying to stay ahead of the curve, right? This is digital in general. We've talked about for a long time, is constantly evolving, constantly changing. Algorithms constantly change the way. I mean, iOS 14 comes along and everybody's business changes. Like, all these things, right? And all those pieces we talked about, content and privacy and personal, they all play a part in. And so with that, I guess, like, how have you been able to stay ahead of the curve amongst, with AI specifically, as the new kid on the block in these types of conversations, stay ahead of the curve and actually, continue to educate yourself as digital landscape changes all the time? How do you stay ahead of the curve and think through this?
It's tough. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's tough there's so much content and information about AI, and then as a marketer, there's so much that is just generalized marketing.
Yeah, I agree. And as you talk about, let's just say slowness to adopt, or some of the concerns folks may have, right? I mean, it has brought up a lot of, like, ethical um, conversations, let's just call them, right? What does that look like? What does ownership look like? If it's synthesized content versus actual and real content, or am I manipulating the content in some way? So I guess for those out there that are really starting to explore this, and since you brought up content a few different times, what are the pitfalls that you see of being this kind of forward-thinking marketer that wants to leverage content? What are the pitfalls that are there for you as a brand and as a brand leader, and how do we avoid Totally. One of the things that actually comes up quite a bit within that conversation too is you talk about name, image, and likeness, right? Is transparency, and the transparency really is do we need to let consumers know that content is synthesized or has been generated via AI? Do we not need to? Is that right? And there's all these studies that are showing lots of wild statistics all over the place as to the need to be there. So what's your take on transparency when leveraging technology like this, and then being able to essentially effectively let consumers or other businesses or anyone know that this is the way that you're going about either creating content or building marketing plans, personalized marketing plans for them. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how that continues to play out, overall. Right? Do we start to care more because we learn about it? Or I think there was even a recent study that said consumers actually didn't care as long as they knew that it was some sort of synthesized content. But if you told them after the fact, it was a very negative opinion of the content too, which is an interesting dynamic that ultimately is going to play out as well. Yeah, totally, totally, totally. And we've talked a little bit in this conversation. We've talked a lot actually about content, like whether that's email content, whether that's image content, whether, offsetting, production costs, things like that. I'm curious to get your take though. What about like in the media space, right? Actual paid media. Like where are you seeing innovation in that space overall, and what does it mean for kind of the traditional advertising philosophies or strategies that we've developed in the past? How does AI assist us? Yeah, I mean, within those ripple effects, like, do you think there's, any unique challenges that the media side of the equation is going to face that maybe the content side or the brand marketing side doesn't, right? As we get into actual like like large amounts of money being spent and trying to optimize that in a myriad of different ways, are there other inherent challenges that exist? Totally. It's such a control is such an interesting portion. I think we could have an entire separate conversation around the control that we're either relinquishing or taking back, depending on how you look at it within the AI world. But Alan, this has been super fun. I appreciate you joining me, to talk about all of the different ways that you're seeing, the generative AI revolution impact the marketing world. Any final thoughts for us today, just on, anything takeaways, final thoughts, ways that we should all be thinking about it in your eyes? Gotcha. Love it. Great words. Well, Alan, I certainly appreciate you joining. Thanks so much for cluing us in and being able to be part of this awesome impact of generative AI and marketing series that we've launched, and really, really excited to see you. Thank you again for participating, and look forward to hopefully we can have this conversation again, maybe in like a year, and let's see how all of these things have changed. Cool. All right, Alan, take care.